Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Phil. Thanks to 350.org and 350 Eugene. And thanks especially to all of you who showed up tonight. I think we have the technological capacity to play a little video clip that tells the whole story in 52 seconds. I'm going to depend upon the person in the back room to make that happen. Can you put the cursor right in the middle of the slide there? Ooh, there it is. We have plenty of time for questions. People laugh when I'm not telling a joke. They don't laugh when I do tell a joke. Maybe my sense of humor is just a little off. So that's the whole story, really. Life is short. So the same story applies at the level of our species as what I just showed in the clip. At the level of our individual lives, life is short. Play more, according to Xbox, and probably the Dalai Lama too. I would say live more, but it's pretty close to the same thing. And the same applies at the level of an entire species. We show up as Homo sapiens some 200,000 years ago. We take a few blinks, the end. Life is short for us as individuals. It's pretty short for species as well. Only two things I know for sure. All of us are going to die, and our species will go extinct. The only question is one of timing. I suspect that the timing in both cases is going to be shorter than most of us imagine. So this is the world we used to have. In 1620 or 1491 or whatever period you want to describe in time before European Americans showed up on this continent, we had extensive old-growth forest, and the figure shows how that has changed over time. And now we have a lot of this. And the same applies for the ocean as well. We cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet with no consequences, but we act as if that's exactly the case. As if we can show up, foul our nest, dirty the planet, pollute the skies, pollute the water, erode the soils, and then won't have any consequences. We act as if we can drive to extinction 150 to 200 species every single day, which is what we're doing, and that will have no impact on us. It's absurd, really. There have been 5 great extinctions in Earth's history. We're in the midst of the 6th mass extinction or great extinction event. The previous 5, in 2 of those cases, they were a result of rapid warming. In 3 of the cases, they were a result of rapid cooling. But the ones that were particularly lethal were the ones that experienced warming events. An asteroid strikes, a bunch of particulates go up in the atmosphere, it cools things off, the dinosaurs disappear 65 million years ago, for example. But when things are warm, that's when it gets really ugly. And the Great Dying from 252 million years ago resulted from a warming event. That's what we're experiencing now. The refereed journal literature finally catches up with reality just a few days ago in concluding that the 6th mass extinction is underway. The lead author of that paper says life would take many millions of years to recover, and our species itself would likely disappear early on. It's because we're large-bodied mammals that depend upon so many other species for our existence. There's a disadvantage associated with being on the so-called top of the food chain, and that's that When all the species below you die, you don't have anything to eat. So it looks like we missed the ark. That the ark has already set sail and we missed our chance to turn things around. I'm going to put boundaries on how rapidly I think we will lose habitat for humans on this planet. We are human animals, and like other animals, we require habitat to survive. And that includes air and water and food and all those niceties. And this is where we're headed, towards a hopeless, cracked up planet. I have been accused of having no hope, and I completely agree. Guilty as charged, I have no hope. Hope is wishing for an outcome over which one has no agency. Hope is wishful thinking. Hope, as Nietzsche pointed out, is the worst of evils, for it extends the torments of man. Hope and fear are the twin sides of the I don't know the future coin. We hope for something to turn out differently. We fear something might turn out differently, but we don't act. We can't control the future to any great extent, except for those around us, but we hope for something better. This is not to be confused with the kind of hope that we throw around all the time. I hope the microphone continues to work. I hope the battery holds up. I hope the lights stay on for another day. Oh, maybe that is the same thing. In addition, as Edward Abbey, iconoclastic writer from Tucson, pointed out many years ago, action is the antidote to despair. And I would go a step further and point out that even if the odds are great, even if the odds are impossible, then action is the only course. If we're the least of the underdogs, if there is no chance, if the odds are impossible, then what better measure of our character than how we act in that situation? Anybody can cheer for the champions. But those who show up and cheer, and not only cheer, but act on behalf of the ultimate underdogs, are the heroes in my book. As Oliver Tickell pointed out in a paper now nearly 7 years old, on a planet 4C warmer, all we can prepare for is extinction. And he was talking about human extinction. And this results from not that relatively low increase in global average temperature, but instead from the lack of habitat in the form of superstorms like Sandy, in the form of the Great Dust Bowl around 2.0. Now, thousands of people died during the 1930s in the Dust Bowl in this country because the air they were breathing had so much dust in it that it clogged their lungs. We think we're special. We think we're wise. Homo sapiens, the wise ape. We're clever, that's for sure. Homo calidus might have been a better name for us. That means the clever ape. But we cannot live without habitat, at least not for long. Take, for example, the drought that is impacting us here now, and also that killed the livestock in the photo on the bottom right of the screen. And what stands out is the livestock, oh, how horrible. But what's beneath that is the complete absence of food. There's no grass left. The habitat has been destroyed by a drought. The same applies to us. When our habitat is destroyed because of drought, or because of ocean acidification, or a combination of those two and many other factors, then we don't have long. We've had no humans on Earth at 3.3 degrees centigrade or higher above baseline in the past, so I think Tickell's assessment, based on his conversations with scientists and his reading of the scientific literature, I think that conclusion is actually quite conservative. We haven't had humans at 3.3 degrees centigrade or higher above baseline. That's equivalent to a 4C rise in temperature is equivalent to about 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit for the human body. If we experience a 4C increase in temperature, 7.2 degrees above baseline, 98.6, then we're at 105.8 degrees. I don't see how anybody lives through that. at least not for long. Earth has a fever. The parameters then, we could, and I'm not making any predictions here, but we could reach that 4C above baseline mark in as little as 18 months. Global average increase in temperature. That would result from the El Nino that is underway right now, reaching about 0.15 degrees centigrade, which is what happened with the last big El Nino from 97, 98. This one looks like it's bigger, but even if it's only the size of the previous one, that will release 0.15 degrees centigrade global average temperature rise from that huge battery known as the ocean. The ocean stores heat and it stores carbon dioxide. And when it releases that heat, the planet warms. So I think that's pretty much locked in, that 0.15 C temperature rise associated with the release of heat due to the El Nino. It could be that the ice-free Arctic occurs this year, 2015. This is where we're at in 2015, nearing the all-time low. And this slide indicates the quote, 3-century event that happened just a few days ago when within a single day, the Arctic ice lost 320,000 square kilometers of extent. That's an area the size of New Mexico, gone in 24 hours from the Arctic ice. If that happens, then we certainly could experience the 50 gigaton burst of methane field researcher Natalia Shakova warns about as, quote, being highly possible at any time. When we have an ice-free Arctic, a blue ocean event, I suspect that will increase dramatically the odds of that first 50 gigaton burst of methane coming out. That will be sufficient to collapse civilization, because civilization depends upon grains for its existence, and we get up over 2.1 degrees global average temperature rise, and that means that we're at more than 4 degrees in the interior of large continents. And so we can't grow grains at those kinds of global average temperature rises. And so that means the collapse of civilization, which because of global dimming associated with the particulates that industrial civilization puts into the atmosphere, most notably sulfates from burning low quality coal, that serve as an umbrella in the stratosphere. When we stop putting those particulates up there, they all fall out of the sky in a period of 3 or 4 days. And then we lose the umbrella. And that will produce at least a 1.4 degrees centigrade temperature rise in 3 or 4 days. So it could be that these things all come together. And also, if we experience that kind of rise, if civilization fails, then I can't imagine how we avoid an ice-free Arctic in the very near future. The U.S. Naval Postgraduate College did an analysis a few years ago concluding that the Arctic would be ice-free in 2016, plus or minus a couple of years. And the headline said, Naval Postgraduate College predicts ice-free Arctic in 2016, 84 years ahead of schedule. Like nature has a schedule, and she didn't check with us. Everything, you read it every day if you follow the climate news, everything happens in 2100. Right? Ice-free Arctic, oh, that's 2100. Lack of habitat for humans, oh, that's 2100. Everything happens in 2100. It's weird, how did nature pick that date? You know, you'd have thought she'd have gone with 2012 in the Mayan prophecies. But no. In any event, another side effect of the short-term demise of industrial civilization is our inability to properly decommission the world's 447 nuclear power facilities. And one of the consequences of that is that the water drains out of all the pools, the cooling ponds, and that exposes the spent fuel rods in 1,200 of those pools to the atmosphere, and they all explode, producing the kinds of fires this planet has never witnessed, with ionizing radiation suddenly spewing all over the globe. When asked about a year and a half ago how long it would take to decommission Indian Point nuclear power plant outside of New York City, Jasko, the most recent ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the United States, said it would take 60, and then he realized how big a number that was. So he backed up and he said, or 50 years once we start the process, which depends upon having a lot of money. 60 or 50 years if we start it, if we have the money. But there's no money in decommissioning. There's only money in recommissioning nuclear power facilities. So I can't imagine a situation in which we're going to have 50 or 60 years to decommission nuclear power plants in New York City or anywhere else. 4C looked like it was the real deal until it became locked in. We're dead certain to land at 4C in the not too distant future. The analyses I just gave do not take into account the 10-year lag in global average temperature rise associated with carbon dioxide alone. So there's a lag in maximum heating associated with carbon dioxide because carbon dioxide roams around, goes into the ocean, and comes back out. And so by the time carbon dioxide gets around to warming the planet at its maximal level, 10 years have passed. And so I'm not talking about that, obviously, in the 18-month time frame. So the response of academic scientists to the idea that 4 degrees centigrade global average temperature rise is a given, is locked in the very near future, the response is to move the goalposts. Oh, if that's for sure, then that won't drive us to extinction. It must be further back. It must be 5 or 6 degrees that'll drive us to extinction. Well, how could that be? The science can't change just because it becomes more imminent, can it? If we maintain business as usual, according to the very conservative International Energy Agency, we're going to hit up to 6C global average temperature rise by 2050. That's taking into account only carbon dioxide, ignoring the handful of other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. If we tack on just one of those, methane released from the Arctic Ocean, Paul Beckwith, climate scientist at Ottawa University, concludes we'll experience a 5 to 6 degrees C temperature increase within a decade or two. Interestingly, until quite recently, Paul, who is a colleague and an engineer and a laser physicist, believed that we'll survive through that. But in a recent interview, he, I think, has finally dug into the biology a little bit, and he concludes the way we're going to survive that kind of rapid global average temperature rise is by living in nuclear submarines. And when I heard that in a radio interview, my first thought was, Paul, you know you said that in your out loud voice, right? That's not habitat. Nuclear submarines are not habitat. That's like saying we're going to go to space. Yeah, humans can persist in space for a while, as long as all the things we provide here are taken up there. And it's the same in a nuclear submarine. So Beckwith is talking about one of 50 irreversible self-reinforcing feedback loops that I know about, that of release of methane from beneath the relatively shallow seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. And you can see that methane in the atmosphere has gone exponential since about 2007 and continues to rise. In fact, I showed this slide in Western Europe in April on a speaking tour, and there was a guy in the front row who became very agitated when he saw the slide. And I thought, oh no, here goes. This is going to be the guy who asked the silly question, and I'm going to have to act polite. And then when I was done, his hand shot up, and he's right in front of me. You know, it's not like, any questions? Any questions? Any questions at all? So yes, what's your question? He said, I thought you kept up with the literature. I'm like, I'm your keep up with the literature guy. What do you mean? He said, well, and I'd been on tour for about 10 days at this point. He said 3 or 4 days ago that graph was updated, and the 2015 data indicate that the curve is far steeper than what you're showing. And I'm like, I'm the Pollyanna in the room. I love that. You and me, we're going to dinner, buddy. Just a couple well, I'll just pick out one example here. NASA's CARVE project in July 2013, based on observations from satellites, concluded that the methane plumes in the Arctic Ocean were up to 150 kilometers across. That's 150 kilometers across of bubbling ocean. That's a big deal. That's a lot of methane being released in a short period of time. Methane is more than 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, molecule for molecule. If we just add up these two greenhouse gases, we're at 600 or higher parts per million equivalent of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Remember when 350 was the number we absolutely positively could not cross? And then once we did, 400 became the number we absolutely positively could not cross. Well, we're at 600 equivalent now, and the shifting goalpost keeps moving back. Beckwith's prediction from late November of last year makes sense when you consider a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences indicating a 5°C global average temperature rise in a span of only 13 years. And you look at the rapidity with which temperature has changed in the past. We have Ice Age, we have Jurassic Park, and we have very few other stable periods in Earth's history at any time in the past. We're right here today, and it could be that's close enough to here that it's sort of a stable point, but we're in the midst of abrupt warming now. There aren't many way stations between where we're at today and 10°C temperature rise. And in fact, Beckwith pondered that at the same time he made the 5 to 6 degree temperature rise prediction. He said, well, it could go 10 or 11 as well and stabilize there. And I don't feel very good about that prediction. Note the abruptness with which these transitions occur and the long periods of time of relative stability. We're talking tens of millions of years at stable states of Jurassic Park and hundreds of thousands of years at least with Ice Age. And we don't know a lot about what triggers negative feedbacks. We don't know what brings the temperature down, much less so rapidly. The Great Dying from 252 million years ago, this one that even overshot Jurassic Park, transpired over about 20,000 years. And now we're headed for the same sort of situation, potentially, in a very short period of time. Okay, there's a lot of controversy around methane with folks like David Archer at the University of Chicago and Gavin Schmidt, who replaced James Hansen in the US government, saying that methane is never going to be a problem, at least for a really, really long period of time. There's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which concluded that the heating potential of methane was 72 times greater over the long haul than carbon dioxide in their fourth assessment, and then dropped that down to 36 times in their fifth assessment. Based on what we don't know, methane was mentioned exactly twice in the IPCC's fifth assessment, both in a single table, concluding that it's a problem for the grandchildren to solve. Something I've heard since I was just a wee grandchild, by the way, with respect to environmental issues, and we haven't made much progress on any of those. So methane itself is pretty controversial. Let's ignore all that and talk about one of the other 50 self-reinforcing feedback loops, that of water vapor in the upper troposphere. And this paper, again from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the premier journals in science in the world, concludes that our analysis verifies the presence of the largest known feedback mechanism for amplifying anthropogenic climate change. And you'll see that water vapor is kind of a big deal as a greenhouse gas compared to others. So it could be that based on water vapor alone, we've triggered events that will cause that very rapid increase in temperature. Carbon dioxide emissions are exceeding those of the Great Dying, and methane has gone exponential, is on track by itself to wreak all kinds of havoc in terms of global average temperature. So it looks to me like there's a whole bunch of lines of evidence that all point the same direction. And that direction doesn't involve us. Already at the relatively slow rate of global warming, less than 1 degree centigrade over the course of the last 200 years, already that's faster than plants and animals can adapt by a factor of 10,000 times. So now that we're in the midst of abrupt climate change, it's difficult for me to imagine that we'll be able to have significant plant life anywhere on the planet. Plants and animals just can't keep up with very slow rates of change, much less the more rapid rates of change that we've really just started, beginning in 2007, 2008. Great headline here from a journal paper just a couple of weeks old: suitable days for plant growth disappear under projected climate change. And of course, the projected means 2100, because that's when things get serious. But I love this subtitle, potential, as in a problem for the grandchildren to solve, potential human and biotic vulnerability, as if humans and biota are somehow different things. There's humans and then there's life. I thought we were alive, maybe. If you want more about the facts, and who wouldn't, you can go to this single essay at my website and get confirmation that all of the things I've said before can be linked to their original source. And you can find out about those 50 irreversible self-reinforcing feedback loops and the other 2 that are reversible if we had the political will. Again, no humans on Earth at 3.3 above baseline in the past. Climate change is already proceeding 10,000 times faster than organisms can keep up, and it's all about habitat and us becoming the livestock in the not very distant future. Already phytoplankton is rapidly disappearing from the ocean, and according to the refereed journal literature, could disappear altogether. That's the base of the marine food web, which means half of the food humans eat. The other half comes in the form of land plants, and it's starting to look a lot like the panel on the lower right with respect to land plants. Everywhere I've been on this trip, when I interact with people who spend their time outdoors, they tell me, I've been following your work for a while, I know about abrupt climate change, but this year, I'm surprised. It surprised even me. We're having this big drought. My cherries have all fruited out, even the late season ones are done. My arugula, I usually get 2 cuttings, it bolted before I got 1. All those kinds of things that involve food, which is really handy. As you can perhaps tell, I'm not an optimist. I really don't, like all people, I don't think I'm pessimistic. I think I'm a realist. I think this is piss. I think it's really, really bad. I think it's horrible. I think it's tragically sad. It appears that our intelligence is our undoing. So how did we get here? People ask me all the time, where did we make the wrong turn? And I think we made a few million turns in human history, and nearly as I can tell, they were all wrong turns. But at least more recently, I think it's not too hard to point the finger at imperialism. What does it take to maintain American empire? It requires obedience at home. And this upper right panel is in a town in Alabama during the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And the citizens of the town in Alabama legally protested illegal actions by the local banks. And in response, the National Guard was brought in to quash the protests illegally. Obedience at home is absolutely mandatory to maintain an empire in decline. Look around at the police force and compare it to how it used to be in the 1970s and even the 1980s. Protect and serve. I think that's what it says on all the police cars. It doesn't apply to everybody, apparently. And then, of course, there's oppression abroad. If your sovereign boundaries happen to encircle an oil patch, well, that's ours. So we're going to have to kill you and take it. Jimmy Carter was perhaps the last decent man in the Oval Office based on his everyday actions, and yet he's known for the doctrine that bears his name. The Carter Doctrine says, with respect to the Middle East, that's our oil over there. Jimmy Carter, the Marcus Aurelius of his day, knew then when when the United States had the world's third largest military. It seems so quaint now. Now we spend more money on our military than the next 15 countries in the world combined. After the big energy shock of 1973, 1974, action had to be taken. What does that mean? Opening up Alaska. What does it mean? Building a military so we can go get the oil. What does it mean? Drone bombs. That's our oil over there. We flip a switch, the lights come on. Every single time. We flip the switch, somebody dies, so the lights can come on. The third leg of the stool that is imperialism is full-scale destruction of the living planet, on which we actually depend for our lives. But here's one definition of civilization. You take mountains of rocks, you grind them up into powder, and then you mix them with a little water to make large rocks again. That's civilization. That's the construction of cities. It's horrible. It's horrific. It's just what we do. In addition, we can't use civilization to turn this around. Civilization itself is a heat engine, as pointed out by the work of Tim Garrett. Published 3 papers now, the first of them in November 2009 in the prestigious journal Climatic Change, in which he points out that civilization is a heat engine. I don't care how you run it. Solar panels, wind turbines, wave power, it's civilization. It requires a large amount of materials, rare earths, oil, coal, to build all those solar panels and wind turbines and so forth. Civilization itself is a heat engine. The response from among my former colleagues in the academic community is the same as the cockroach in the belly of the chicken. I'm going to change things from the inside. I tried that. I found it seriously wanting. So one response comes from Dr. Seuss in his 1957 book, The Cat in the Hat. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happens. We live lives of incredible privilege. For one, we get to be here against odds that are truly cosmological. For another, because we live in the global north, we get to live large. We have the world's reserve currency. People ask me all the time when I present, don't you think your message is going to make people act like hedonists? And I say, really, Americans act like hedonists? When will that start? Like 50 years ago, maybe 100? Yeah, it might. We get to live. Against odds that are truly cosmological, we get to live. And we get to live in a system that endows us with enormous privilege, whether we deserved it or not. Right? We were born into captivity. We showed up here. We didn't have a choice. I didn't get to vote. I don't know about you. But I'm like, my mom is 8.5 months pregnant, and I'm in there and I'm pondering, do I get to vote on this? Do I want to go out there? And you notice whenever anybody comes out, they start screaming right away. But there's no going back. It's like technology. Once you cross that Rubicon, you got it. You're living with it now. We get to live. The odds against, we know a lot about DNA. A tremendous amount, really. The odds against you being here in physical form at any time in history ever, the odds against that happening exceed the odds against winning the lottery when you buy one ticket every week and you win every week for 20 years. The odds against you being here are far greater than that. And yet, here we are. As evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says, in the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I that are privileged to be here, privileged with eyes to see where we are, and brains to wonder why. That's pretty amazing. We get to live. We, those of us who showed up, the 7.3 billion, and the relatively few who came before, we get to live. It's not a have-to thing. It's not like going to that crappy job, right? It's not like you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go, oh, geez, I have to go to work again. Or Put it another way. Oh, geez, I hate my life. I have to live. Yet another day. Living is horrible. No, it's not like that. I mean, it is for some people. We all know them. They have these dark clouds over their heads all the time. They walk in the room, we run away. We get to live. Of course, the end of that experience is the same for everybody, as it is for every single organism throughout all of history. We get to die, too. But first, we get to live. Among the taboos in this culture, the things we never talk about: death, dying, grief, grieving. These are the conversations that are strictly off limits. What's the phrase we use all the time? Death and taxes, inevitable. Well, we bitch about, I mean, we talk about taxes all the time. We never talk about death. It's taboo. We get to live. Not only do we get to live now. We have these incredible toys. We have the technology most of us have in our pockets right now, and we're kind enough to turn off the volume, which I appreciate. We have this technology in our pocket that we can take out, and in 30 seconds, find out through technology the computing power of which exceeds that of a computer that would fill this room 20 or 30 years ago. We have that in our hand now, and we can find out that everything I said has a link to it and is reported in the journal literature or in a YouTube clip or in The Guardian. And so we can just find all those things right now in a matter of seconds. And then we can also find out that, sure enough, everybody dies. And that in the grand scheme of things, we're a speck on a speck on a speck. That as far as the universe is concerned, we're really not all that special. Right? This universe has been around for 13.8 billion years. That's with a B. Homo sapiens, the wise ape, about 200,000 years. Let's put that in perspective. Not. If my arm span is the 13.8 billion years of the universe, like this, then the run of Homo sapiens on this planet, some 200,000 years, is the equivalent of the last few cells at the end of my middle finger. Did I really just do that? I scraped them off. It must be me. I'm accused all the time. You can find out on the internet that abrupt climate change is my fault. So I just killed us all right there. I scraped my. I hate it when that happens. So it's pretty amazing. We're a speck on a speck, and the universe cares about us just like it cares about all those other species that have gone extinct, which means really not at all. The universe is pretty indifferent to our existence. And we think, having shown up just in the last few years, at the very end of the show, that the whole thing is about us. What hubris. I don't think anybody spends their final hours thinking, I should have bought more crap. I don't think anybody's going down this way, certainly nobody in this room. Right? So how do you want to spend your short time on this planet? And even if you live to be the ripe old age of, say, 100 or even 117, I think you'll conclude that it was all really rather short. And that when you face your imminent demise, when you become cosmic compost, you're not going to say, I'd be so happy right now if I'd have just bought that 7th pair of shoes, but I only have 6, so my life sucks, and I'm going to die miserable. No, nobody's going to say that. Yes, we're material-possessing organisms, but that's not what brings us joy. It brings us a little tiny bit of happiness, but it doesn't bring us profound joy. That comes from the ones we spend time with. I think this slide says it all. Some people think I'm really sappy. Guilty as charged. I'm hopeless and I'm sappy all at the same time. It's weird. If you think it's weird from out there, you can imagine what it's like from in here. Yeah. This is what it's all about. This is what we do. We spend time with a relatively few people in the course of our lives, and we bring them joy or not, and they bring us joy or not, depending on how we interpret the whole thing. And then we reach the end of our days. There's nothing about this that is particularly surprising, is there? I mean, you knew all this. When you were 11, you knew you were going to die. And so it's not as if it's a big surprise, but we get on that hamster wheel. We start thinking about the 401k, and we go faster on the hamster wheel. That's my new definition of civilization. Must go faster. So we get on the hamster wheel, and pretty soon the bars are going by so fast they become a blur. And we're just spinning ever faster, and so after a while we don't even know the bars are there. And there we are, born into captivity, and we don't see the bars. Afraid to step off the hamster wheel, because then we'll see the bars. Let's step off the hamster wheel. Okay, this slide is why I'm essentially never invited to speak on college campuses again. Because now I have gone beyond the natural scientist I used to be, presenting evidence and interpreting that evidence. And now I'm talking about how we might actually live in light of our imminent demise. Oh, that's for sociologists. That's for psychology. That's not for scientists. You shouldn't do that. I don't really care. I think this conclusion that we have a limited time on this planet makes us ponder what we're going to do with that time. For me, that conclusion goes straight to doing what I love and pursuing a life of excellence. I don't know what that means for you in either case. I don't know who you love. I don't know what you love. I know who and what I love. I know what I consider excellence to be, but I don't know how that works for you. Maybe you're Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon, and you think excellence means having all the money when everybody dies. But I doubt it. And so you might want to at least ponder the questions that this culture drives us away from. What is excellence? How do we define that? What does it mean? What does it mean to have an excellent day? At the end of the day, can you say, I strove for excellence today? Or instead, will you say, it was just another shitty day on the hamster wheel. Tomorrow, I must go faster. So that's at least something to think about. I almost never get asked this question. I almost never see this on the internet. Instead, I see its corollary with an exclamation mark. He's wrong. And it could be. It could very well be that all of the evidence I presented, none of which comes from me, by the way, it could be that global warming that exceeds the ability of organisms to keep up by a factor of 10,000, it could be that that's wrong. Could be that the International Energy Agency, an incredibly business-as-usual organization, taking into account only carbon dioxide, none of the other greenhouse gases, it could be that they're wrong about up to 6°C temperature rise by 2050. Could be they're all wrong. Could be the climate scientists are all bought and paid for by the progressive equivalent of the Koch brothers to lie about climate change. Could be Tim Garrett is wrong and his analysis is all messed up, even though he's published several times now. It could be that Paul Beckwith is wrong about his prediction. It could be that the 5°C temperature rise that occurred 55 million years ago in a span of only 13 years, maybe it's all wrong. We still get to live. And even if we live to be 117 years old, the world's oldest person turned 117 in early March of this year, and when asked about what that first 117 years meant to her, she said, and I quote, "It seemed rather short." I can guarantee you only two things. You will die. Ow. Got to get those steel-toed shoes. You will die, and this species, Homo sapiens, will go extinct, just like the other 99% of the species in the history of the planet that have already gone extinct, just like every other individual that has reached the end of its life and therefore died. The good news, or maybe the bad news, is that we don't have an expiration date stamped on us when we come out. I always thought that would be a better idea. I don't want to celebrate my birthday. I want to celebrate the years before I die, so I should have an expiration date. We put it on everything else. You go to the store, there's eggs. Oh, they have an expiration date. They don't tell you, but they've been driving around the country in a refrigerated van for 6 months. Why do you think you crack those eggs and there's no yellow in them? You think they're actually fresh? They've been roaming around the country in a truck for 6 months, and you got to use them by the day after tomorrow. Right. Everything's got an expiration date, even the cans, right? Well, when I was a firefighter in my youth, we were on fires, we were eating rations, canned rations. This is the late 1970s, and we were eating canned rations from World War II. And look, I'm a picture of health. Those things don't wear out. Food lasts a long time. The nutritional value declines over time for canned goods, but there's some nutritional value, and with firefighters, all you really need to do is stuff them with anything to keep their bellies from growling. So expiration dates are kind of meaningless for some things. We would love to know what ours is, and I can't tell you that. I suspect the habitat for our species will be gone in the not very distant future. But that doesn't mean everybody will die that day, does it? Some people will have a bunch of food stored up in a root cellar, and so they'll get to die live longer. Die more slowly or live longer than everybody else. But that's sort of like being in the space station, the International Space Station, right? I mean, yeah, you're persisting off the bounty provided by Earth in the past and allowing that to get you through for a little while longer. So, and I'm not judging that, by the way. Not at all. I personally would love to see the collapse of civilization, if only to give other species a better chance than they have right now. Non-human species. Oh, no. Oh, what's next? Even the Daily Mash. The Daily Mash is like the Onion for Great Britain, and they have this thing from a couple of days ago, humanity to keep tweeting positive slogans until the point of extinction. This is our whole culture, right? The bottom line from the story, hours after the last human keels over in a desert wasteland, there will be an automated tweet saying simply, "Love what you do." It's almost like they're watching my presentations online. I'm your satire guy. So, it's getting out there, right? The jokers, the comedians, they're always ahead of the curve. The artists intuitively know what's going on. The scientists might know too, but they're not going to tell you. If you want to know more, how could you not at this point? I suggest two sources. One is free. GuyMcPherson.com/climatechaos has all the data that I presented with links to everything and a whole bunch more. And I update that essay every few days. Most recently, less than a week ago. And then there's the book, of which I have only a handful of copies left on the shelf after today's book signing at Tsunami, co-authored by Carolyn Baker, and really about 95% of the story is in the subtitle, How to Live with Death in Mind. So save yourself $20. You got 95% of the story, How to Live with Death in Mind. Notice it does not say how to die miserably, slowly, alone, because you listen to Guy McPherson deliver a presentation. It doesn't say that. That's the next edition. This second edition just came out 3 weeks ago, so it's really hot off the press. If you're wondering about jousting at windmills, if you're wondering what to do next, there's a sign-up sheet at the back for people who are interested in having the conversation that is unspeakable in this culture. Put your name and email address on there, or show up for the Pachamama event tomorrow evening if you can. And you'll find people who accept the fact that everybody dies, and so does every species. And that we don't know the timing, but we're at least willing to have the conversation that is taboo in this culture. Death, dying, grief, grieving, we don't do any of those. But some people do, And if you want to get together with those people, sign up for that list. The other thing you could do is sign up for a workshop offered by a colleague of mine and I that you can find described at onlyloveremains.org. And it's something about abrupt climate change being the reality we're within now. And what does that mean for me? Who do I become in light of the information that I'm not going to live forever, that I'm 75 years old and I might live as long as my 18-year-old grandson? What does that mean? How do we act? What kind of conversations do we have about that? We don't have much power to change the general narrative. For one thing, because of those self-reinforcing feedback loops, the narrative on the climate front is already locked into place. We have triggered events that will remove habitat for our species in the not very distant future. That's beyond our ability to control as individuals, Margaret Mead and her famous expression notwithstanding. But we do have enormous power and therefore enormous responsibility with respect to the relatively few people we spend time with on a regular basis. We have our families and our friends and the people we hang out with. And how we spend time with them and how we interpret what they say and how we respond to what they say are completely within our power. And I would argue that they are our responsibility as well, to act with compassion towards those we love and love to spend time with, to remove judgment from those interactions. You know, one of the best things about near-term human extinction is that the jerks die too. So we don't have to be judgmental about the guy in the Hummer that cuts you off in traffic. No more. That's petty stuff. Let's focus on the big stuff, the important stuff. I think that's our responsibility in those small groups of people we spend time with, to treat them with dignity and respect and compassion and expect the same in return. And it's well beyond responsibility. It's a joy and it's a privilege. Thank you very much.